Welcome to the Art of Feminine Negotiation, or Persuasion podcast. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today we're talking with Henry Gereis about empathy as the secret ingredient to negotiation. So welcome, Henry. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and for those who don't know Henry, you're in for a treat. I had to get him on here to share his perspective with you because we definitely sing off the same song sheet. Henry's the founder of Gereis Law. In his early career, he quickly realized how valuable alternative dispute resolution was in negotiating settlements and avoiding that expense and emotional toll and the adversarial nature of litigation. And he discovered a passion for criminal defense. He's negotiated thousands of plea deals, and he's going to share some of those hot tips and insights with you here today. So let's start, Henry. I know your motto is client-centered caring counsel, and that's an unusual motto for legal counsel to have. So tell me, what does that mean to you?
It's really just going below the line, and it's understanding that what matters in our representation is the client. The client comes first, and they need to understand that we care and that they drive the ship in the sense that they may not understand the law fully, they may not know the law, but it's their interest that is really the most vital
Yeah.
aspect of the whole process. And in constantly putting that first, it shows them time and time again that we truly care.
Yeah, such a beautiful perspective. I think we could use that a lot more in the practice of law. And I know that you really advocate that it's important to treat your client upfront with that empathy and compassion. So tell us a little bit about that, why you think that's so important.
Well, you're building a relationship, and like any other relationship, trust is fundamental and communication is fundamental. So from the very outset, we want to communicate that you can trust us, and the reason you can trust us is because we deeply and genuinely care about your livelihood, your liberty, and that's what's at stake, in a criminal
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, and what I know you're a big fan as well about the criminal justice system needing a little more empathy. So I'd love you to speak to that because and then we're going to roll up our sleeves and get into negotiation. And I'm touching on this empathy piece because I think it's the often overlooked aspect of negotiation. So I'd love to sort of set the tone on that. So where do you think empathy could play more of a role in our criminal justice system?
Sure. Uh, you know, there's so many cases that, various jurisdictions hear every year, and prosecutors can get desensitized to the fact that they are dealing with human beings. Granted, they're dealing with human beings who, are facing charges, but they are human beings nonetheless. They are not the compilation of the rap sheet. They are not just another case number, another body sitting in a jumpsuit. So I really think that getting the DA to understand that and getting them, and one of the ways to do that is to contextualize the client's situation is really vital and
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. It's, one of those foundation. I remember my dad teaching us that as young girls sitting at the, kitchen table. So as someone who's negotiated thousands of misdemeanor and felony plea deals, Henry, I'd love if you could speak to the art of negotiation and how that helps both as an attorney, but also in life for our listeners out there generally. How does the art of negotiation help us?
Absolutely. So if we think about conflict resolution in general, zoom out and take a 30,000-foot view,
Yeah.
to generalize on the left end of the spectrum would be avoiding conflict altogether, right? On the right end would be fighting, or, in a criminal context, in a legal context, would be litigating a matter, right? And in the middle, there's room for negotiation. And there's various styles of negotiation, as you well know. There's
Yeah.
the accommodating, avoiding style, collaborating, competing, compromising, to name a
Yeah.
few. And they're all different, right? And they all offer different sets of skills and should be used, in various scenarios. So whereas an accommodating style of negotiation really focuses on the fact that one player wins, one player loses, you know, um, that is typically done when there's a situation where you're trying to repair a relationship,
Hmm.
or when you are some harm has been done and one party is conceding that,
Yeah.
right? And the other party may or may not be accepting of that. Avoiding style of negotiation is can be summed up as I lose, you win, right? And that's not a very strong position in
Yeah.
negotiation. because there's a clear loser, right? And it's usually a situation where of avoiding the conflict, resolving the conflict outweighs the benefit of the relationship.
Yeah.
Because there you might not have that same relationship thereafter.
Yeah.
But the style that I really like and the style that I practice with the most is collaborating,
Yeah.
where all the parties involved can win, right? And it requires understanding the opposing parties' views, their
Yeah.
motivations, and taking the time to try to uncover their interests. That's very different than the competing style, which is so
Yeah.
heavily depicted in popular media.
Yes.
We watch these shows and we think
True.
that you have to take these power positions,
Yeah.
and oftentimes, in my opinion, I don't think that's the best method of negotiation, because similar to the avoiding style, there's a clear loser.
Yeah.
And there was this old show, Golden Balls, a game show back in the day,
Yeah.
where there was a certain amount of money, two contestants, and they could choose whether or not they wanted to split the money
Oh,
or to
wow.
steal the money,
Yeah.
you know?
I'll have to check that out. Tell me more.
So, in scenarios where it would be advantageous for both parties to just be honest with each other face to
Yeah.
face and say, hey, I am going to split, right? They are taking a risk in that they are trusting the other party to do the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
They can be left with nothing if the other party doesn't do the same, but they also have the benefit of knowing both parties that they would get something if they both cooperate,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's vital in negotiation, because oftentimes we view negotiation as win-lose,
Yeah.
right? But there's plenty of room for all the parties involved in negotiation to win. And even if that takes some compromising, where you would have to concede on certain aspects of the negotiation, that might not be the end of the world if you take the time to prioritize your interests, uncover your interests, and come to find out that there may be overlapping interests.
Yeah. You've got so much in there. I want to unpack some of that and I love, as you were talking about that game, which I hadn't heard of that game show before. I'll have to check it out. But there are a lot of psychological studies, quite serious psychological studies that have been done on that. And it amazes me that people will often take that competitive style when it doesn't even serve them. It's not in their best interest in games like that. And it brought me back to high school. I remember we took it was like a politics course. I forget what it was called. Maybe it was world politics. I don't know. But the teacher had us play this XY game where you got into groups of 4. And it sounds like a similar premise where if everybody cooperated together, let's say if we all chose X, for example, then everybody would win. But if one person in the group chose Y, they took all of the prize and everybody else ended up with nothing. And invariably, and these were our classmates, invariably there would be that one person in every group in the class who would always go for that Y, try to get the win over. And I think we're so conditioned, as you say, to see negotiation as being this competitive game, when in fact, with the collaborative approach, not only is it about a classic win-win, but you get better outcomes than either party could have anticipated when you open up to that. And the last thing I'd say on that, the avoid, it's interesting because sometimes with an avoid, it's not only is it that I lose and you win, sometimes it's we both lose. When people avoid having the discussions, everybody ends up losing. Now, you talked about the importance of understanding the other party and their needs. And I think that is so cuts to the heart of it, Henry. I'd love you to talk a bit about what role you think empathy play. We know you use it as in your practice as a lawyer, but what role do you think empathy plays in effective negotiations?
Well, I think if I can answer that with an example, say that you have two parties, and one of the parties is suggesting that they want to go to the mall, right? The other party is suggesting they don't want to go to the mall.
Yeah.
Okay. And you may be making assumptions off bat and thinking that they don't want to go to the mall because there's an issue with that mall, or they don't like shopping, or connect, ideas that you have associated with this place. When in reality, it could be that the party that doesn't want to go to the mall doesn't want to go to the mall because they want ice cream, and the mall doesn't have an ice cream store.
Yeah.
Whereas the party that does want to go to the mall wants to go to the mall to get a plain white shirt,
Yeah.
and for a good bargain. So, there's room for a solution there where, instead of going to the mall, they can go to another shopping center near an ice cream parlor that has a store that has plain white shirts for a good bargain.
Yeah.
And it's really just uncovering those underlying interests, right? If you were to make the assumption that the person doesn't want to go to the mall because they don't like the mall or because of the stores in the mall, we would have never uncovered the
Yeah.
interest that they really want ice cream.
Yeah.
And so that could be applied in the criminal setting as well, where you uncover the client's interest in not wanting to go to prison,
Yeah.
right? And the DA is insisting that the client plead to a prison eligible charge. You know, there's a solution there where the client can plead to a prison eligible charge for something like felony probation, which resolves their interest of
Yeah.
not serving the time in prison.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, in order to get the DA to see that perspective, oftentimes empathy is necessary. And what I like to do is focus on the community and the benefit to the community. Oftentimes the DA is taking the position they are because they want retribution for an action that's
Yeah.
done, and they want it to come back to the community.
Yeah.
So by explaining that, you can get more of that retribution by having the person go and do a work release program where they would actually serve the community is better suited than the alternative. And that's an example that I could think of, where negotiation is empathy is
Yeah.
really applicable in negotiation.
Yeah. Well, and I love the white shirt ice cream, okay, because it brings it down to its simplest level so that people, for our listeners out there, I mean, all of life is a negotiation, whether you're negotiating with your kids, your intimate partner, whether it's in the criminal context, whether it's multi-million dollar deals with service providers. So showing up with a competitive mindset, you miss those kind of opportunities that Henry's talking about, because when you come from that competitive mindset, we often don't take the time to truly understand, let alone try and meet the needs of the other party. And when you come with a collaborative approach, you're able to find those solutions that are better for everybody. So I'd love you to talk about what role preparation plays to get best outcomes in negotiation, Henry.
Preparation is so important in everything, especially in negotiation, because by having an array of possible outcomes and possible ways that the negotiation can shake out, you give yourself more options and more leverage in the negotiation. For example, if you in the process of being prepared, you have all the interests of your client out on the table. You don't have to necessarily communicate that at the outset to the opposing party, but you have taken the time to prioritize those interests. And over the course of the negotiation, when you're uncovering the interests of the opposing party, you may come to find out that you have overlapping interests. And then you can, at a break, talk to your client and reprioritize your interests based off the overlapping ones, and it
Yeah.
takes preparedness to be able to have that outlook and to be fluid at the same time and
Yeah.
be able to adapt and change,
Yeah.
but have a good understanding of at the outset of what the goal should be.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word fluid, because I'm a big advocate of flexibility as well. When we come from that competitive space, we tend to be so rigid and so narrow focused that I don't know if you've ever seen that exercise, the video with the gorilla, where somebody's told to focus on the white t-shirt team passing the ball, and you're so focused watching this video on the team with the white t-shirt passing the ball that 50% of people watching the video miss that there's a life-size gorilla in a big black gorilla suit that comes, and not only does it just walk through, it turns and faces the camera and beats its chest. And we have that inattentional blindness when we're not allowing ourselves to be flexible. I think that's so important. And when we talk about that preparedness, I'm a big fan of doing what I call the inner preparation as well. Like I call one of them my no fear model, where you consider, like, what are the fears that might show up for me in this negotiation? How does ego show up for me? What are the things I might be too attached to? And what are my triggers that make me reactive? And then do the same for the other side. What are some of the fears that are likely driving the other party? And how can I maybe avoid that or deal with it to my benefit? What are your thoughts on the inner work, if you will, preparation part of negotiation?
I love that. I love that. It not only bleeds into empathy and thinking about what the other party might be experiencing, but it has a practical application of identifying the fears at the outset. You can have a sit down with your client and, first of all, manage expectations, but at the same time, you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls of why negotiation fails,
Yeah.
like getting into the insult zone, or bidding against yourself.
Yeah.
They say most negotiations end between the midway point of the first two offers.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
and understanding that an opposing party might have similar fears, might have similar interests, you may not go in with the strongest position at the outset of the
yeah.
negotiation and risk ruining the entire process by making an offer that's in the insult zone,
Yeah.
where you lose the trust and the ability to communicate with the opposing side.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And when you're talking about that reasons negotiations fail, what in your experience, what do you see as sort of the key reasons that negotiations fail? And I love that the insult zone. That's so great because it's true. And we hear so much about, anchor high or anchor low, depending on what side you're on. But you run the risk that, at some point there's an extreme that is just insulting and sets the wrong tone right out of the gate. So what do you see as some other reasons that negotiations fail?
Well, specifically in the criminal defense context, I think that there's a power imbalance in the sense that, there is an alleged charge,
Yeah.
depending on the stage of litigation, if it's after prelim, there could have been a probable cause finding that this person had committed a crime by a magistrate. And, the DA is making an offer, and the only alternative to the client is to litigate the
Yeah.
matter, right? So it puts their back up against the wall in a lot of scenarios. And I think that power imbalance a lot of times leads to negotiations failing. And I
Yeah.
also think that the type of personality, like you said, psychology and the inner preparation is such a huge part of it,
Yeah.
that if you were to generalize, a type of person that, may want to be a prosecutor, they won't necessarily agree with, my position of empathizing. In their view, they may think that, that exactly is the problem. So there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And also there's a power imbalance.
Yeah. And speaking of power, I'd love what advice do you have for people negotiating with bullies or people with more power? And again, in the criminal justice system, but even beyond that, Henry, as well, like for our listeners out there who may not be criminal lawyers, what kind of practical advice do you have for when you're dealing with somebody who's a bully or is sort of exerting their power, if you will?
Well, then we prepare, and we make them prove it. We go to trial and we make them prove it. And in that scenario, they have their interests as well. Prosecutors have supervisors and bosses like we all do, and they like going to their supervisor and saying, hey, we got this plea to
Yeah.
these charges in this amount of time, right? What their supervisors don't want to hear is that we went to trial and we lost at trial, and
Yeah.
that there was a possible resolution that could have avoided that. And I think that if you consistently try to negotiate and empathize and put your client in the best light possible, but you are also ready if you are dealing with someone that's being unreasonable,
Yeah.
to take an alternative course. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And I think that, oftentimes the emphasis should be on negotiation, but building the reputation and having the rapport as someone that's ready to fight in the
Yeah.
alternative is something that I feel like is valuable, especially in the criminal setting where there's that power imbalance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I often find when and even like outside of the practice of law, just in our lives, when you're dealing with those bullies, that's why I love that no fear model. That kind of bullying behavior often comes from a place of fear or insecurity. So, when you can recognize and empathize with that, it can be important. And one of the other things that I have found really effective, and I'd love your perspective on this, is you invite somebody to be the best version of themselves. In other words, if they're bullying or posturing or being unreasonable or aggressive, you don't call them out on it in a way that causes them to double down or get defensive about it, but instead you're like, hey, you know what? I know that treating people with dignity and respect is really important to you, and I'm not sure what's going on here, but maybe do you want to take a break so we can regroup and come back? And by saying I know that this is important to you when they're not acting like that, in my experience, in most cases, it actually triggers a switch in their behavior. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I love that. I love that. And I think that is very effective, because it, like you said, it does start to reframe their thinking. And it ties in with the empathy, right? Where they don't get caught up
Yes.
in what's right in front of them, but they're able to take a step back and zoom out and remember that they themselves are people too, and you give them the benefit of the doubt. I love that. That's something that's definitely so effective in negotiation.
Yeah, and it's modeling for them to treat, you know, if you treat them with respect, even when they're not deserving it, you hope there's going to be some reciprocity. And speaking of that, when we get those triggers often, I think that's one of those other reasons negotiations fail often when people get into reactive mode. What role do you find emotion plays in negotiations, Henry?
Well, in a classical sense, you know, it wouldn't play much of a role in negotiation in the sense that, you're either dealing with numbers or, terms and conditions. And oftentimes people don't associate, those things with emotion. If anything, they could think that emotion may, hinder the progress that's being made. But, there's this movie, I'm forgetting the name right now, but there was that line, ABC, always be closing. And I I like to remember that in negotiation as well. And that's something where, if you're in a situation where there's like that power imbalance, you're prepared, you have a variety of possible solutions, and that could be helpful.
Yeah, beautiful. And I mean, it's interesting when you say that about being closed. I find that there's a difference between, and people often don't think about it, a difference between being emotional, like getting emotional, and women are often accused of this in particular, even when they're not, right? It's like, oh, the hysterical female. But I think there's a big difference between being emotional and bringing emotion, like knowing what your deep why is, for example, going into a negotiation. That can help motivate you to get those better outcomes and results. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you know why you're there, and you're able to convey those emotions effectively and convey it to a person using the skills like you just articulated, if reframing it to a person,
Mm,
then that's bringing emotion to the negotiation table, and that often is effective. And in a negotiation, the lights are on from the moment you step into the
yeah,
room. And things carry over. The practical practice is that you're often dealing with these people over a period of time, and you deal with them frequently.
yeah.
So, one negotiation, may have an effect of bleeding into the next, and it goes along with your rapport and
Mm.
reputation. And if you bring that emotion to the negotiation table, I love that, and that you don't have to be emotional, but you're giving the opportunity for an opposing party to take part in a better style of negotiation where all parties involved can win.
Yeah. And you really hit on a great point there that's worth putting a pin in as well, is that bleed over and that reputation piece, right? Because, and I think that applies professionally, as you've talked to, and also in our personal lives, right? I mean, we often don't think of these interactions as negotiations, but it is. And how we treat our kids or our intimate partners or our friends or other family or service providers in our personal lives can really affect those relationships. So, I'm a big fan of when you're thinking about what you want in terms of your outcomes. Most people just consider the what of the negotiations. I'm like, consider the matter outcomes you want, but also consider the process outcomes you want. And the most often forgotten one is the relationship outcomes. What is your experience around that in terms of the importance of considering the outcome on the relationship in a negotiation?
Well, building a good relationship can take months, years, right? Destroying a good relationship can take a moment.
Mm, yeah,
And oftentimes, it's difficult because you have to put the interest of your client first.
yeah,
And your reputation is sometimes affected by that, and your rapport, but it doesn't have to be, in the sense that you can always come to the negotiation table and you can be the best form of yourself always. You can treat other people with dignity. You can allow that emotion to be a factor in the negotiation without getting emotional,
yeah.
and without burning a bridge.
Yeah, nice. That's really that was a little mini masterclass there. I love that. And what are the key skills that you think sort of mark great negotiators?
Well, I think the ability to be fluid, preparedness plays a huge part, um, and really understanding your client to be able to convey that emotion, and to buy into it, so that way it translates to someone that may not be buying into it. And I really, really love your notion on rephrasing things to the opposing party to get them to wake up and be the best form of
Yeah.
themselves, or realize that they don't necessarily have a disagreement with that particular point.
Yeah. And I assume empathy would be high on your list as well, given that your approach seems to really center around that. And empathy, I think people often don't think that involves that listening, right? Like get curious in the negotiation, ask questions, and let the other party know that you're listening, truly listening, not waiting for your turn to speak, right? But I find that a game changer. Has that been your experience as well?
It does, because it's something where, in listening, you can uncover interests. Something an opposing party says may be subtle, but
Mm,
it can uncover an interest. And then you find that the point of contention no longer exists,
yeah.
that, those competing interests are now overlapping interests. So listening is so vital. And oftentimes, especially with attorneys, we're just waiting for our turn to hear
So
ourselves
true.
speak.
It is so true. And I love that. That's so true that you have that opportunity where somebody, when you're asking those questions and really listening, they give up an interest that otherwise wouldn't have come up in the conversation. If you were bargaining on positional bargaining, and there's great gems and opportunities to come up with those new fluid flexible solutions when you're open to hearing an interest that you didn't know was there, and that's a no-brainer for you to be able to offer up. It's like a gift in the middle of the negotiation. So how do you define success in negotiations? I think for me, for so long we've been conditioned to see success based on that competitive, I win on all points, beat my chest, take no prisoners. I'd love your perspective with that more empathetic and collaborative approach about how you define success in negotiations.
Sure. I think that what's instrumental is uncovering the deepest interests of your client and prioritizing the interests, and having realistic expectations, but also putting your best foot forward to try to get the best possible outcome, right? I think that success in negotiation is adhering to your client's deepest interest, putting the client first and try to satisfy their top interests, and along the way, you may have to concede other interests, prioritize. But if you can empathize your client, and empathize with your client, excuse me,
Yeah.
and paint them in the best light to an opposing party, it may lead to you satisfying their deepest interest, and I think that is the win.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think the other thing that's great about that, Henry, is that everything that you're talking about, certainly it applies in criminal defense work, and it applies in our personal lives. It applies in just about every negotiation that you might have as well. When you're able to show up with that empathy, when you show up with that collaboration, when you're truly listening, then you're going to be able to get those better outcomes. And surely that's more successful than taking the win, win the battle to lose the war. And, I'd love to hear what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you would say you've ever had in your life. And it doesn't have to be about negotiating. It can be on anything. One of those aha moments that changes how you look at things.
I think the greatest mind shift I've had is that tomorrow isn't promised, and that
Mhm.
there's so much value in now, and the opportunities that we have now, and the things that we have the ability to change now. Tomorrow isn't promised, and like you see behind me, pictures of Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that was something that cemented that in my mind. Is this was a person that I grew up watching, admiring, my whole life. 82 games a year, regular season, 2.5 hours a game. So I spent more hours watching Kobe play basketball than
Wow.
any person. And I think that losing close friends, losing people that I really admired, made me wake up one morning and just have a shift in mindset that tomorrow is not promised, and that the time is now and we have now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that perspective. And when you talk about Kobe Bryant, what are some lessons? If you watched him that much, what lessons did you take away from Kobe?
Well, one of my favorite memories of Kobe was when I was 6 years old. I was watching a playoff game with my dad at a car wash, and we were playing the Jazz, and Kobe was a rookie that year. It was a close game. We still had a chance to win the Lakers. And I say we as if I'm on the team.
I love that.
um, Kobe went down and he shot a three-pointer. He airballed it. And the next time down the court, he shot another three-pointer and he airballed it again. And he went down the court and he shot another air ball. and we lost the game and we ended up losing the series. But the ability to be
Mm,
that confident and that courageous and to take the shot, I think that I love that about him.
yeah,
He was never afraid to take the shot, and he was always, he said, if he feels nervous, he knows that he didn't put in the time and work to be prepared. That nervousness is a result of um, not being prepared. And that's another thing that I really try to apply. And I think could be applied to any person in any field in
yeah.
life.
Yeah. What a great message. I mean, that take the shot. I mean, who a 6-year-old kid watching a basketball game, that's pretty impressive that you took that message away because isn't that a beautiful metaphor for life? Like, take the shot, right? I mean, if we stay in our comfort zones and we never challenge ourselves, and again, for listeners out there, women in particular often are, we don't ask. 62% of men presented with a first salary offer will negotiate for more as compared to only 7% of women. So, get that, lift up that confidence, take those chances, get out of your comfort zone and take the shot. I thought that's beautiful advice, Henry, for life. What a
Thank you.
great life lesson. And I can't believe how quick our time has gone here together. There's been such great little nuggets for everybody to pull from this in terms of negotiating and professionally and personally. And I'll end with asking this: what's something that you know now that you wish you'd known earlier in life, Henry?
I would say that everything is an opportunity. Every encounter is an opportunity. Every every day is an opportunity. So just viewing life in the prism of this is an opportunity. And even things that we're not looking forward to, presenting it to ourselves in that light, instead of viewing something as a burden. It's actually been proven to have a physiological response. Viewing things as an opportunity releases dopamine,
Yeah.
and it gives us, an extra push to, go on through life and to go on and accomplish all the dreams and all the things that, we set out to do.
Oh, such great advice. And even, I mean, COVID was a great example of that as well. Like, especially at the beginning, a couple of years ago, I mean, people were in such a state of profound fear. And I actually did a series. I started doing Facebook Live saying, look at the opportunities and the gifts that are out there. Just shift your perspective, right? Like, yes, there's a lot of fear and we don't want to undermine it. And at the same opportunity, like, Mother Nature is getting a rest for the first time in a long time. You've got an opportunity to connect with friends and family again in a way. Look at the beautiful opportunities that are here right now. So what a great life lesson. And also, just, I know I said it was the last question, but it triggered for me because that reminds me of failure as well, right? When we're able to look at failures as opportunities. And I often tell my clients, like, have failabrations, like, celebrate your failures and squeeze the juice out of it, because it's only a failure if you don't hold it up and look at it and see what you learn from it and how you can do better. So what are your thoughts on failure?
Absolutely, and I take that. I learned that lesson from Kobe as well. That even failure in and of itself is an opportunity to rise up, and that diamonds. The cliche goes that diamonds are made by pressure.
Yeah,
So if you failed in something that you set out to do, like you said, it's only a failure if you don't take the time to reflect on it, to build yourself back up, to go and do it better the next time, and to know that you're better equipped because you have failed and that you built
yeah.
yourself up.
Yeah, so, so good. And tying that back in terms of negotiation for our listeners there as well, I think one of the most important and most overlooked aspects of the cycle, if you look at negotiation as a cycle where you've got your pre negotiation preparation, then you've got the formal negotiation. And the one that almost always gets missed is that post negotiation sort of review, like, go over what worked, what didn't work. Don't look at the things that you didn't get. Don't just go away dejected. Use that as a beautiful opportunity, as you say, to explore, all right, how can I do better next time? How can I tweak my approach to make myself the most influential and persuasive that I can be? So beautiful advice. Thank you, Henry, so much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and loved the little gems you dropped for us.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and for our listeners out there, be sure again, check out Henry Gereis. You can find him, check out the website. If you want a lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer who shows up with empathy and compassion and puts his clients first, and you happen to be in California, definitely reach out to esqaspire.com, like ESQ like Esquire and aspire.com, and also check him out on Instagram at Gereis Law, and that's Gereislaw, but we'll make sure to put those in the show notes for you. And I'm sure you all got loads of value from this episode, lots of little nuggets about how to negotiate a better life, how you can use empathy to get better outcomes, that collaborative approach to reframe how you show up to get more of what you want and deserve in life. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done that. And make sure to share the message as well with anyone who you think could benefit from negotiating a better life for themselves. And make sure to join our Women on Purpose community under Facebook under Women on Purpose Community. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. And that's a wrap.